Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we're back. And if you are joining us right now, we are just getting our first conversation for this morning started. And as we mentioned before the break, we are now joined by the Honorable Patrick Faber, leader of the opposition and leader of the United Democratic Party. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Gavin. Good morning, Paul. And good morning to all your television viewers of Open Your Eyes. A pleasure to be on the set this morning.
And it's a pleasure to have you. And the last time you came on our show, I wasn't able, I think, to introduce you as the leader of the opposition, and but you've since regained that post. And so let's just ask before we talk about the party, let's talk about what that means for you personally to be back in the chair, so to speak.
Well, it is certainly convenient to have the leadership of the party and the leadership of the parliament in opposition under the same roof, so to speak. And that, as many would have observed, was proving to be a problem within our party. So for me, that unification of posts has certainly helped in terms of the management of the party. This is a position that, of course, I've put on the record is not one that I had hoped for. When you lead a mass party and you contest elections, it is to win. And so it was a position initially in November of last year that I was afforded, but because we didn't win the elections, obviously, but it is one that I took on very seriously. And now that I'm back in the saddle, it means the same for me, that I will, of course, do my best as a parliamentarian, serving the United Democratic Party, but in the leadership capacity.
I was there the day when you were reinstalled as leader of the opposition. What did that day feel like for you? You must have had some sense of personal accomplishment. I know that this decision was about the party, but for you, it's been a long, hard-fought public battle.
Yes.
Must have had some sense of personal accomplishment to say, hey, I said I would do this when I won that recall convention, and now look, here I am.
Well, obviously, but what was more important for me is that I got the chance once again to make that first attempt. As you know, becoming leader of the opposition again also meant a wider unification of the party that was to follow very shortly after that. And so for me, that was the bigger accomplishment. It is one that was very necessary for our party and for our nation. And of course, it feels good to preside over that, especially as you point out, Paul. My personal struggles were there, and it signaled that I was getting back on track to something which I've held no secret from anybody, that I aspire to lead the party and to lead it to success, and of course to lead the country one day.
And, speaking of that, I think the obvious, or the question that isn't going to be in everybody's mind is talking about, healing that rift that was in the party. And of course, there was a public battle, as Paul said, and at times it got ugly. Personal issues got thrown out in the mix as well. Yeah. So how does the party move on then from that sort of, let's say, very sort of antagonistic sort of relationships?
Well, it is the nature of the game, gentlemen. We have seen where, these fights get very nasty, and some will say, unfortunately, but if you look at it in a very optimistic way, you will see that it is through these very battles, if you want to call them that, in our party, that the democracy prevails, and it makes our party very strong in terms of the democracy. We have had a number of conventions starting back from 2016, or maybe even before that, but let's look from 2016, where we have been battling for who is going to be the next leader of the party. And so a lot has been said and done in the course of that. Of course, I have been able to take on the leadership now. And so it is a matter of us putting aside personal differences. In fact, in some respects, it's not even difference in terms of policies and principles that we hold. Quite often, it is a matter of ambitions. I would say to you that the number one difference, if you term it like that, between John Saldivar and I, for instance, from way back has been that we both had ambitions to lead the U.D.P. And so there can only be one man left standing when you go into these battles. And the important thing is to be able to pull it together and to unite. I think that all in our party will agree that it is better for us to be united for the cause than separated. And that realization comes after a while, especially when it is we are in opposition. There is a party in government that clearly is messing up royally. We have never seen a political party gaining the government and becoming so unpopular and so targeted in such a short time. So that signals for us that it is absolutely necessary for us to bring things together, and that is what we decided to do.
Going back a bit on come Friday, I think it'll be the first House meeting.
Monday.
Yeah. It'll be the first House meeting with you back at the helm as leader of the opposition. I'm sure you're expecting those cheeky comments from the other side of the House, as you guys have been experiencing.
Sure.
Who's the leader here? That's not my question, though. What will the seating look like come?
I am to write to the clerk at some point this week to make that known, and I'm still contemplating that. But more or less, it'll go back to where it was. You know, there is a hierarchy or a setup, if you will, of how we have traditionally done it, and I will return to that.
Will Sister B be there?
I don't know. She attempts to make every meeting is what I believe. She, of course, you know, Sister B has a different view of things, but she, if you would call her and talk to her, she would tell you she would do her best to be there.
And going back to the personal relationships that you were
Sure.
talking about, that sort of, you know, that are required to work in order for a party to work. How would you describe then, you know, how would you describe your relationship with John Saldivar and, you know, former leader Shine Barrow? Because, you know, when you talk about competing ambitions, it seems that, you know, the three names are sort of always in the mix. So what's your relationship like today, and how do you work together?
Well, I have a very cordial relationship with both of my colleagues. We always maintained, and you've heard me say this multiple times, when it comes to John Saldivar, we both have dedicated more than 25 years of our lives to building this party. And over that time, we had a very strong bond of friendship. So while the divide was very great in terms of where our ambitions landed us, the friendship was not hard to rekindle. And in fact, we enjoy a very cordial friendship at this time. John serves on a number of our party committees behind the scenes, but he gives his contribution, and I think that nobody can dispute the fact that John Saldivar is a brilliant mind and, of course, has a lot to contribute to our party and, by extension, to the nation. So he is very much involved in the workings of the party. And as it relates to my relationship with Shine, we continue to work cordially as well. We are working on several initiatives together. You know that he has been engaged with the diaspora recently, and in fact, as a part of the shadow cabinet, we recently placed under his care that part of the portfolio that relates to the diaspora, and so he will take on more of that, and he and I have agreed that we will do that together. He obviously has a very, very good talent and good strategies to engage the diaspora and even to some extent the foreign affairs aspects of of shadowing the government. And so I'd tell you that we have a good, very good working relationship. I think COVID has not allowed us to socialize much, so I can't say that we've been able to determine a friendship beyond our working relationship. But I'm convinced that we have the kind of unity now, and of course that can only improve. That will see the party become even stronger.
Do you think that that extends then, or that sort of goodwill extends now to the rest of the party at large? Because during the battle, if you will, that was the criticism that was heaped on you by both John Saldivar and Shine Barrow, that you couldn't command the support of the party, and that therefore you were not the best man for the job. But do you think that that has changed?
Well, you will understand that when we have these types of situations, that people generally follow one faction or the other, and follow one leader or the other. And so when it is that the leaders unite, that was a very important move for the party. That, to me, was pretty much done away with. So I enjoy a cordial relationship, but more important, support from, I'd say, 95% of the party. There are some who have decided not to continue in politics, and that's why I wouldn't give the other 95%. And while the criticism may be, well, these persons have come on board because you have mended fences with, let's say, a Saldivar, or I don't even think that Shine was involved in that way with a following of colleagues. It was just the situation that saw him propelled to the leader of the opposition. So while that criticism might be there, I have also been working on personal relationships with these colleagues, which was there before. It's just a matter of rekindling and making stronger. So I'm confident that we are on that path, and that we will emerge, as I had promised, stronger than ever. And that's important for the country. It's important for our party to remain alive and kicking, yes, but it is even more important for us to have a strong opposition, to make sure that the people of this country have good champions, not only in the House of Representatives, but in the wider Belizean population. And that is exactly what we're going to achieve, and we have been achieving.
Do you anticipate having this type of support during the next National Party convention?
I do, but you know, every day is an eternity in politics, and the way our party is structured, we do not deter anybody who wants to run. And so you may well have a contender, but I'm not worried about that kind of thing. No. First of all, I'm tried and tested in terms of conventions. But it is also that I believe that if you are working, if you are doing what is required of you, if we put things together in a way that is a level playing field, which is one of the things that I'm certainly engaged in doing now, and I have the support of the party in doing. It is only COVID that prevents us, for example, from having our conventions at the constituency levels to ensure that we have our caretakers officially put in place, and we have functioning committees, because while we have committees in names now, and I am right now as we speak engaging with these committees. We have our first zone meeting, which is with the North tonight by Zoom. But the intention is to strengthen the mechanism of the party on the ground in each constituency, so that whenever these decisions have to be made, we know that the right people are involved. And I'm convinced that if that is the case, and you do your work, that when it comes to those leadership conventions again, things will go smoothly for me and for the party.
Your relationship with John Saldivar, I just want to touch on that a bit, because some mean words were thrown on both sides, and the impression was given by you, at least as I would have understood it at the time, that he wouldn't have stood a chance in becoming, in sitting in an influential position under your leadership, and on the other hand, he was practically against your leadership in public. One questions, what is the motive behind such a reunion? What is the motive? I know things were even thrown around that on the table deals may have been cut to get such a relationship reunited.
Well, that I think that horse has been flogged to death. We made that very clear at the time of our press conference shortly after the unification efforts of the party. There was no deal cut. We simply wanted to see a united party, and we were not pleased with the way that things were going for the party. And we decided that we were going to move forward. And you are correct, there were things that have been said in the heat of things. That does not mean that we can't get along. That does not mean... The best description that I've found, and I keep using it because to me it exemplifies perfectly what happens within our party. It's a family. Just like a family. You have your siblings, you have your parents, you don't always get along. You say mean things about your siblings every now and again. In fact, you go to fist fights, you go to blows, and then at the end of the day, when somebody tries to touch your family, any member of your family, you are there to defend, and you're there to hug up and to unify your forces in order to fight whatever external threat is there. And that is what the U.D.P is. And so, while this is why we've always said it's not a matter for the general public, it's not a matter for the PUP, it's not a matter for anybody else. These internal struggles are our internal struggles. Insofar as people are looking at how it weakens our position as the opposition, I think that is fair game.
Yes.
But in terms of our own internal party issues and structures, that's our business. And it is why the rules of the party have said that it should be handled internally, and putting things out on the wider media, especially on social media and so on, is not the best way to go. And we've generally tried to rein things back in and follow with that.
You know, and I think that's a good segue to talk about some national issues now.
Absolutely.
But speaking of that, you know, what do you think is sort of the perception then of the U.D.P now, as it stands, you know, in terms of it being a strong or viable opposition, based on all of the public infighting that was happening over, you know, a few months ago?
Well, there can be no getting away from the fact that there is a damaged reputation. I think that started with the loss of the election, the inability to win or even hold on to more seats in terms of the municipal elections. But this is, as we've seen with both political mass parties in this country, a cycle. And what people view as unfortunate can actually be good fortune in terms of how we now have the ability to restructure, to rejuvenate, if you will, the party. That is something that I am excited about, and the excitement once again in terms of the wider party is building. And while we're not quite there yet, it is a work in progress to regain the confidence of the Belizean people. One thing we are certain we want to make people confident of is that we're not dead, and that in fact we are there fighting for the Belizean people, and that we will continue that fight, and we will do so while we build our party to make sure that people can once again have the confidence in us as a party to put us back in government. And I don't see that as, it's difficult work, it is tedious work, it is time consuming, but I don't see it taking us as long as either of our parties have taken in history. The U.D.P between the 98 and 2008 period was a 10-year period, and the PUP took 13 years. And it may be because the party that was in government in any of those respective terms of serving were not as unpopular so quickly as this party in government is. And so I anticipate that if we can put things back together, that we'll be able to win that next general elections whenever it is called.
While I hear that, what the general public is seeing, what we're seeing is a resurrection of some of these persons that lost badly at the last general election. Say that to say, where is your vision, where it is currently, your vision to build a new party with a new face? That's one of the questions that has been asked.
Well,
is that dead?
because I think those who view it that way are mistakenly looking at things. This party has had no conventions, or we have not gone through any of our democratic processes to select anybody to stand for the next general election. In fact, even myself and Collett would be able to have a challenger when that time comes. And in fact, we have but only one caretaker that is officially selected, and it is why I've said that our processes of putting in or doing things correctly is still just before us. We will have caretaker conventions, and so those persons who are from the old guard, if you want to call it that, who ran in the last election, let's put it that way, because I don't want to sound too much like the PUP, this old guard and new guard stuff. But if those individuals wish to run, they will put themselves up for the conventions, the caretaker conventions, which should last, their term of office should last about a year. And then we will go into, in another 2 years or so, the selection of our standard bearers, or candidates, that is, for the general elections. And those decisions, while there are some influences from the party here and there, are by and large the decision of the people of those constituencies. So nobody can say we're putting up the same old candidates at this stage. That is not true. More importantly, what should be said, or what ought be said, is that we are engaging everybody. And if those who criticize me want to say, you know what, Faber, you're now saying, you had initially said you don't need those people, and truth be told, I never really said that. But I am willing to concede that the new approach is to embrace many of those who are still interested in working for the party, because there is still value in that, and we keep things together as much as we can, and then we make it very clear, as we're doing now, that we're charting a new path forward. Even those who were a part of the last general election will concede to you today that we must do something differently. There was a reason why we didn't win, and we didn't win so overwhelmingly. So we have to do something different. And we are now setting our mechanisms in place to properly define where it is we want to go, what is it the Belizean people want to see us do, and more importantly, what is it that we need to do that is best for Belize. Because to be honest with you, being in leadership is sometimes a very tough thing. It's not as simple as doing what the people want. Sometimes what the people want you to do is not what is best for the country. And so there has to be the right balance. You want to stay focused. And I suppose those who are in leadership now, the Prime Minister, I see him agonizing sometimes between doing what is good for his party and what is good for the country. You know, it's a very difficult dance. But in a time like the time that we're experiencing now, what certainly has to prevail is what is good for the country. And so the U.D.P. in opposition, like I said, there's some positives in being in opposition, has all that is needed. It's a perfect combination of situations in order for us to now define for us what is good for the country, and then have that line up with what we want to see in the party.
And speaking of, you know, what's good for the country, and you keep referring to the unpopularity of the present government, and going into, let's say, some of the reasons why you say that. would be a good way to talk about perhaps national issues. And let's say, Mondays, there's a House meeting coming up. Priority areas which you will be addressing, or what you consider to be areas in which the current government is lacking. What would you say is probably the number one problem that they're facing right now?
Well, I'll give you two, better than one. Crime and, of course, the COVID situation. I listened last night as the Minister of Health say that we have not yet peaked in terms of the severity of the COVID situation, and that to me is very alarming, that we have not yet peaked and we are not, in my view, doing all that we can do. And you know that the party recently held a press briefing where we shared our position. We shared a 10-point position on what we think the government can do. And I know that you saw, Paul, new faces on that press conference, right, including what seems to be of big importance to people, my fiance. We saw Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. George Goff, who are not necessarily new faces to the party, but in terms of the leadership of that segment, we see them stepping up, and this is really what we want to do in the party. But the fight against COVID is failing on many fronts, and I'm not only blaming the government. The wider population has got to do a better job at getting back to some of those basics, making sure that we're following the protocols as they are set out by the government. But I will say that I have seen where the government, since our press conference at least, has made some attempt to put in place some of the things we've suggested. Key to those suggestions was testing and making sure that testing is free. We saw that 2 stations, at least for free testing, were opened. We have received as representatives an outreach from the Ministry of Health to say, can you put together the people in your constituency and encourage them with your machinery to get the vaccination, and the government will come in and do what is necessary. Something we've long suggested. Why is it that we're not setting up shop in Collet and in Albert and in Mesopotamia and everywhere else? If the people won't come to you, then you go to them. And I've seen where they've frowned on my suggestion or party's suggestion about incentives for vaccination. I think those things can work, and we can get to a much more comfortable percentage of the population being vaccinated if we do those things. I maintain as well that we ought to be giving much better care, and it's not as a result of the doctors and nurses and other healthcare frontline workers, but it is resources. We need to make sure that those persons working in our healthcare system are properly equipped, not only with the machinery and general equipment, but with the medication. There are medications that are not available at our hospital if the person doesn't go out and buy it at our hospitals, and they need to be able to access that in an if the people can't afford it, the government should make sure that they provide it. This is, what do you value a life, And the way to do that is to eradicate the middleman in these procurement of the pharmaceuticals. And that's another thing that I think is killing the fight against COVID. We have set up, as I indicated in my Independence Day address, a procurement process now to enrich people, and that is obvious. People are getting rich off testing, people are getting rich off the medications, and this should never happen in the time of a pandemic. And it's not only happening in Belize, it's happening worldwide too, but we can, where it is possible on our front, to eliminate some of the middle people. That ought to be done. I came in to the airport yesterday, and you know that there is a mandatory testing now coming into the country. And while the people at the airport and the government officials who were there, the airport officials were absolutely cordial to me, and I was given a complimentary test as a diplomat. Everybody else who came who didn't have a test had to pay $100. No, people who travel, people will argue, can pay. But there are circumstances in this country where people need a test and they have to pay $100 or $150 for that test because they can't get it. Opening at the Civic and the Belmopan Civic are just two locations. So these kinds of things, I think the government needs to improve on in terms of the fight against COVID, and we need to get things under control there. The curfew and the lockdown Sundays clearly have not yielded any kind of success. And so in my view, if those aren't yielding successes, they ought to be reconsidered to the point where they become instrumental in helping to fight things.
Does not to cut you, but does the opposition support the current mandates on vaccination as it relates to restaurants and churches? Where do you guys stand?
Well, we made our position known on that. While there can be no doubt that the government has to push that effort. I think in some other Caribbean countries we see where the mandate is just that everybody must get vaccinated if you're working, especially in the public sector. And all we've said is that while we understand the government's push, and in some cases support the government's push, we have to be mindful that there is a segment of our population that believe that they have a right to not do this, and that ought to be respected. We ought to try to find ways. But in terms of support for vaccination in general, there can be no doubt, and we want it proudly proclaimed that our party supports our citizens getting vaccinated, and that we ought to do whatever needs to be done to get our people vaccinated within their rights. I mean, we don't want to overstep and infringe on their rights. And I appeal to those persons. You know, a lot of times what happens in our country is that we tag along to things because it looks attractive from the television. Listen, we live in a country where vaccination has long been put on us, so to speak, our region. In fact, it is one of the reasons why, as a region in CARICOM, we've done so well in terms of fighting off deadly diseases and so on. Everybody knows that when a baby is born, a couple months later, they start on a vaccination path. And even if you miss, by the time you get to primary school at age 5, they're going to ask you for that immunization card, and if you don't have it, you have to go and take those shots. Or if you're going to the States, they will ask you about these things when you're applying for a visa. So you can't miss, basically. So apart from those who believe that it is some kind of detriment to their health, and I don't get that there's a very strong argument for that, given all the science that's behind it. But I'm not going to go any further than that, other than to say that we must respect the rights of those individuals, but we also want to ensure that those, because as I said in the press conference, there are many, in my view, who are not vaccinated, and it's not because they're anti-vaxxers. It's just that we have not gotten to them. And so I encourage the kind of initiative that the government is doing to reach out to area reps to say, you bring your people, since you certainly have a hold on them, and we will vaccinate them. But the second point that I was making is on crime. And obviously things have gone way off the rockers in terms of crime.
You guys have called for the resignation.
Absolutely.
Of the Minister of Home Affairs.
Karim Musa has, when in opposition, made interview after interview to the media, proclaiming that he had solutions. Plan Belize, of course, outlined all kinds of strategies that they would do. We have the Prime Minister on record talking up a storm of what he would have done on the south side when similar type situations flared up on the south side, especially in Belize City. I see that he's now trying to do a camouflage job of declaring the South Side some development area, because people called him out on it, because they brought back the clips of what he said he would do. And some of these things are absolutely not going far enough in terms of helping our residents on the South Side. They've had a lot to say about South Side representatives. And there must be a reason why people continuously vote for the U.D.P. on the South Side. Because we work with people and we try to develop their lives. It's a tough job. It is one of the most difficult areas of our country to serve as a representative, to be honest. For instance, I saw where one media house last week went to my constituency on Antelope Extension over Crewman Lagoon to interview a family that is living without water and light. Well, there's a reason for that, because the lagoon is not a safe place to live. They've been advised repeatedly, and I have not gone out there as a representative in government or out of government to say to people, listen, you all will get the police, you're squatting and it's not. I've tried to encourage them, but there's a reason why BL doesn't put electricity over the lagoon. There's a reason why they don't have water there, because it's not a safe place to live. And I would be improper as a representative to go to ask the utility companies to set up shop and to push a road in the middle of the lagoon that's a catchment area. We've long gone over this. And it seems to be a favorite spot for journalists to go to look at how people live and say it's because the representative is not working. I wish they would interview some of the many people who have benefited from educational opportunities, and it's graduation time for UA and for UB. So I see many of the success stories. I get text messages on my phone on a daily basis saying, thank you, Mr. Faber, because it is because of you and the U.D.P. government that I'm able to do this. Some of them won't put it on Facebook, some do that.
But you know, Honorable Faber, but even with that said, you know that what the first thing a lot of people will say on the issue of crime is going to be that, well, this is not a problem that starts or was developed overnight. And people will say, well, the U.D.P. government had 13 years, the problem didn't get better. How is it that you can make criticism now when it has been less? That's the first thing people will say, and I think that even one of your former parliamentary colleagues, a former member for Pickstock, and I'm paraphrasing, had used words last year to the effect that there was almost like a failure to the generation of young people who are committing these crimes, because statistically, you look at it, overwhelming amount of young people involved would have been growing up during the years in which the former U.D.P. government was in power. So how do you address that criticism when people say, well, it was your problem to solve first? So how can you criticize now?
Well, firstly, when people come with, oh, well, it was not any better under you when you were in government, the truth is that is why we had a change in government. When Musa was on the TV as a member of the opposition, he had all the answers. When Johnny Briceño was on the television criticizing the Barrow administration for how it was handling the crime situation on the South Side, they had all the answers. So uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. They ought to now put in place those measures. And it is a lesson for the Belizean people not to have your aspiring leaders or your leaders promise you pie in the sky things. The U.D.P. in government was making its best attempt, and I will give it to you that there might have been more that could have been done. I think we often err in terms of how we handle some of these very important situations like crime, like maybe putting efforts in to fix things that really don't work, like giving the police more equipment and believing that policing the crime situation will help it to subside, when in fact that is just a temporary fix. The term root cause of crime is now very cliche, but it is real. What needs to happen is that we need to address the situation of our young men in particular. We need to address the situation of our families and our homes. We have situations on the south side of Belize City where there is a matchbox house, and we have 10 people living in there. There are situations in this country where people sleep some by day and some by night in order to be accommodated in a house. We have houses where children and adults coexist, which causes a lot of sexual situations that are not convenient or are not ideal. So these things are very real, and if people don't know where they're going to get their next meal from, and then you throw on top of that a pandemic and a government that is not responding, because make no mistake, the flaring up of crime is directly related to the living situations of those, especially on the south side, and the people on the south side, or young males in particular, may be a bit more aggressive in terms of how they handle their frustration. But it is a problem. And so when the government does not respond, when they cut off the food pantry packages that these families were getting, when they cut off the unemployment support that they were getting, there can be no doubt that that is contributing to the situation. You are right, it may have been already in the pipeline, already blossoming, because for anybody who said that, you give credit to a former colleague of mine, but that is no rocket science. It is there that we have fallen down at the wheel in terms of our being there for our society, or young people especially, or young males in particular. And we have to find ways to make it attractive. And it is a difficult competition. It is a competition. While I was Minister of Youth, for instance, and Minister of Education, we offered opportunities. I watched with amazement as the new government tries to do some of the same things, like offer free education to the government schools on the south side. That has been in place. We have tried desperately to get our young males in school. We've offered them, but when there is a life that is more attractive, something that brings immediate, school is a promise. Get an education, and then yes, down the road you will get a good job, and that is fastly fading when things don't pan out for so many of our people who get an education. But imagine when I'm telling a young 13, 14-year-old boy, go to school and get a life, when in fact he can get out there in something that is much more attractive and bring immediate results. So the competition cannot be fair. We cannot just treat with these things in a way that is superficial. We have to get down and understand what goes on in these families, and that is what certainly I have tried to do as a representative on the south side. And that's not an easy fix, and it is not something that happens overnight. It has to be a consorted cooperation in terms of our efforts.
And with all that said, I think people will also be asking, you've been, well, you're now in opposition, you've been, or well, your party has had a long term. You yourself have extensive political experience at this point. Now, as leader of opposition, what is it that you're going to do differently based on that, all that you have learned, based on the mistakes of the past government and perhaps the present government, and also what you've learned personally through your own personal
Well,
battle?
I wouldn't call them mistakes. I would call it experience, and sometimes the fixes that administrations feel will work don't work. So it is more out of our experiences that we realize that some of the things that the government now will try to attempt or are forced to attempt will not work. And so we have to get back to the basics. In our party at this time, and I'm very proud of our shadow cabinet that is backed by committees that help to advise them. You'll see that we put out more releases, and our press conferences now are well advised, because we have technical people behind the scenes who are supporting the work of the party. And so we have engaged them in trying to ensure that we are preparing, and we share from time to time our ideas and what we've come up with in terms of these press releases and press conferences, and the Belizean population can look forward to more of that happening as we strengthen the workings of the party, but also the workings of our stance as opposition. So our job, some argue, is not to provide the solutions, but it is certainly to ensure that the Belizean people understand that we are contributing to the development, because we can't say, well, we'll withhold all our ideas and watch the country go down and wait until the people decide to give us an opportunity again. No, we have to be supportive of those things that are good, and we have to share our ideas where possible, but we have to convince the nation that we are ready, and that is what we're doing behind the scenes, and that is the work that I believe we can continue to do over the next year or two to ensure that people understand that we understand this work. And it may be through starting and having bad experiences or experiencing what works and doesn't work, but certainly we would be fit and up to the challenge.
I know we've run out of time here.
So quickly.
So quickly. I mean, the conversation could go on. There's so much we could talk about. But in wrapping up, I do want to ask you personally about therapy, how that has been going for you. I know it's something that you engaged in after a messy public situation. How has that been going for you?
Actually, I had a session as recent as Saturday, as I've said to people that my therapist is living in the United States, but we have sessions face to face. She has come to Belize. I have gone over to California, where I visit with my sons. I visit with them. I try to visit with them regularly. So over the course of the last week, I was visiting with them, and I had an opportunity for a face-to-face session with my therapist. And we meet now once or twice a month. It is less frequent now. And in fact, in that session, we had an opportunity to go over the time from when I started to now. And it really has been very, very, it's been eye-opening, first of all, because you get a chance to reflect on what you as an individual go through, and you get a chance to be reflective, and that is very, very valuable for anybody. You can't just go forward and not pay attention to what you're doing. And I've been able to look at situations that I would have handled completely differently before, and say, this is what has happened and this is the outcome, because I have been able to use some of those strategies that I've gained. And you know, the good thing about therapy is that the strategies that you come up with are not necessarily those that the person providing support for you gives you. It's many times what you come up with on your own, because you, by and large, well, I believe for some, know what you need to do and know what, you know, but it's just the encouragement to get it done. And that is one of the successes for me. And it's not by any means an all exhausted process. It is continuous, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. And so I continue sessions, and I'll probably continue until the end of the year, and then after that try to do the work as I move forward on my own. But it's work in progress, and I appreciate that you asked about it, Paul, because I want people to know that I was very serious when I engaged in the therapy. It is not anything that I'm ashamed about. In fact, I encourage those, you know, leadership can be very burdensome, and where you can get that support, it's not a weakness. It can help you to be stronger, and so I encourage that.
And Honorable Faber, we are really past time, but I hope that our producer doesn't get mad at me, because I do have one last question that I do want to fit in.
Okay.
And I think it's important to ask, you know, as leader of the opposition, but I just want to know perhaps some of your quick thoughts on the government's economic recovery plans and the blue bond, if you will, just before we close.
Well, much of what has been panned out, if you remember my Independence Day presentation again, these are some of the things that the U.D.P had in the pipeline that were, as I termed it then, painted blue. Working with the TNC, for instance, is something that we had in the pipeline. We always support the kind of initiatives that will see our environment flourish, and conservation has been a very big push. It gives me an opportunity to criticize one of the moves that I heard the Prime Minister announce as well, in terms of building that bridge in northern Ambergris to Mexico. As I gather it, the people of Ambergris are absolutely against it, and for good reasons. There are some questions on the table right now as it relates to what can be done to recover the economy, obviously in tourism. The port situation is something that is very much on the table. We have proposals for 3 ports, as you know, and some have environmental difficulty. The State Bank project, for instance, you know that there's serious back and forth going on with that, and the U.D.P made its position known. In fact, we did not know if there was that kind of clearance given. It was not given with the approval of the U.D.P administration, and I need to be clear that it is not because the U.D.P then or the U.D.P now is against that kind of development. All that the U.D.P said is that it cannot be done without people giving their input in the form of consultations, and that is our position, and we maintain that. It may be that people see it as something good. In fact, we go all over the world and we see causeways in effect, and it can coexist with nature. But let us have the people give us their view so that we cannot have that kind of fallout. But overall, we need to be doing things that are sustainable, and we need to make sure that these things, the recovery from COVID is sustainable. And we see the government doing a lot of smart moves, albeit prodded by what the U.D.P was doing. We won't knock that. You should not throw away the baby with the bathwater, and that's the perfect example. But all of that might not translate into success if there are underneath intentions to do bad, and we've already seen some of that flaring up, where the government is not honest in much of what it attempts to do. We see some shadiness, if you will, happening, and so the opposition will be ever watchful of those kinds of moves and be very supportive when it is we see the government doing things that will help. I hope I've been able to do that justice in a very short period.
Yes, that was unfair to give you, that in such a short time. But Honorable Faber, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we are going to be taking a short break. And when we come back, we are going to be joined by UNICEF. So please don't move, and we'll be right back.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.